Go ahead and call this meeting to order. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the November 10th Joint Legal and Justice Systems and Behavioral Health Subcommittee meeting of the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered today on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here together today. Please join us in helping to uncover such truths at any and all public events. Our second item today rather, is an update on drug court and mental health court. And here to take us through are Chris Furman and Linda Grant.
Chris, I can't hear you. So do you want me to just mention a couple of things and then go by each topic or question and we both speak? I'll go ahead and start. It looks like Chris may be having some microphone problems. So
yeah,
Chris,
Linda, that's fine, Linda. Go ahead and do your thing.
Okay. One of the first questions I was given was housing for participants. I think everyone on this committee is probably aware that housing is just a huge issue in all communities across the country, not specifically in Whatcom County. I think we're very fortunate to have the Opportunity Council and the centralized housing program that runs so well and so effectively and efficiently and reach such a high proportion of our homeless. I think where we tend to see gaps, and I won't speak on Chris's behalf, but I know at least for mental health court, is when you have a generalized housing program and then you have people with special needs, there can be gaps that evolve around the special needs. Mental health court is fortunate in that Lake Whatcom Residential Treatment Center has a housing program that's not in the centralized housing pool that meets the specialty needs of folks with chronic mental illness. So a percentage of our population can be housed there. We also have some reentry beds at Citygate that are, and they have crossover population because reentry is folks coming back from prison. So they're familiar with individuals who have mental health, substance use disorder issues. And who have been in the criminal justice system. But housing is a huge issue. And again, Chris will have a contribution there, but I think it's very much one of the huge issues for folks who have specialty needs, particularly if they relapse. The general housing programs are all tied into federal rules, and between the 24-hour rule, the 90-day institutional rule, the 1 year chronically homeless and meeting that criteria, there are huge barriers to leap in terms of the folks coming into mental health court who come to us via jail and then an inpatient substance use disorder program for 30, 60, or 90 days. So we often struggle to house people in a supportive environment. General housing pool, either it doesn't work for them because they don't qualify or it's not available for months or even a year or two into the program. So I think right now, housing and immediate quick access to specialty psychiatric meds are two of the biggest gaps we see in the system. We currently have 17 people in the district court program with 2 pending applications and 6 in the Muni Court program, also with 2 pending applications. There was a hiatus in the criminal justice system related to COVID, as there was in many other systems. And I think we're seeing things start to get back, moving towards a more normal flow, and we're seeing referrals come back up along with that. We also have great relationships with GRACE program, the specialty mental health officers, both at Bellingham Police Department and Whatcom County Sheriff's Department, and we have seen them be involved as well as sometimes with our members. In terms of COVID, we have Bellingham Muni Court is 100% telephonic because most of the mental health court members are on basic level of Social Security, which is $700 some a month, plus sometimes a little food assist. Most of them don't have smartphones or even Wi-Fi access, so we're using general telephonic access there. Whatcom County District Court is practicing again in person, but with limited numbers of people in the courtroom, social distancing, masks, all those limitations. And we're having our providers join us via Zoom rather than coming into the courtroom. Usually we have quite a community present, and we're missing that now, but we're bringing in as many people as we can via Zoom, and then, you know, practicing safely in terms of how many are in the courtroom at any given time. So I think also there was a question about length of program and how it affects people who participate. I see two respects in which the length of our program, which is up to 2 years, can really affect things. One is all human beings are more likely to incorporate change if we live it a while. We don't just do something differently once and bam, that's it. You know, we've had this big, you know, epic, you know, flash of insight, and suddenly we live our lives differently. I wish we did, because I would have been out of business, you know, a long time ago if people changed that quickly. Change is hard, and recovery is hard, and working your way through a chronic illness with acute episodes such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder is hard. And it takes practice and repetition. And in the case of mental health court, that external structure wrapped around people by the program makes a huge difference. And I think for people to live that change, have a chance to go through a couple of periods when their symptoms start to spike up, and they have help doing it differently and coming back and being stable and moving through it without a major crisis. Also abstinence. Most of the people in mental health court have had huge difficulties with both meth, amphetamines, and marijuana, and both drive psychosis, and schizophrenia and mood disorders. So to have a chance to practice and incorporate what it's like to live clean and sober and how to use supports to stay clean and sober, time really matters in terms of change on both levels. So I want to stop. Chris, you want to jump in? I don't want to eat up all the time here.
I'm gonna jump in right quick. We have Lee Grockmall on as an attendee. He has his hand raised. Would you like to take comments from attendees at this time?
Yeah, that's fine.
So I'm gonna, if Your Honor, I'm gonna go ahead and share some information about drug court. And I want to start with changes due to COVID. It's had a profound effect on drug court, as I'm sure it's had a profound effect on all of you. After the shutdown, we moved completely to virtual court. We also shut down collecting of UAs. Out of an abundance of caution, we collect them here in the office. We can see our clients when they come in. We stopped collecting UAs for approximately 2.5 months. That really led to what I believe was a deterioration in our clients' stability. We weren't seeing them face to face. We weren't able to hold them accountable to their sobriety. And so we made the decision to begin collecting UAs in person again, being very careful, staff and clients. And so we began collecting UAs again in earnest in July. Prior to that, we were collecting them here and there when we knew that clients had relapsed. In May of this year, we began bringing clients back into the courtroom, typically clients who were struggling or clients that were new to the program, so that our judge could develop a relationship with the clients. Since the shutdown, we have not used jail as a sanction, except in very extreme situations where we worry about the client's safety, such as IV heroin users, when we needed to get them back on track to send them back to treatment. And we were very successful in re-engaging the folks that had relapsed and getting them back to inpatient treatment. So that never was lost during this whole process. So where we're at today, we have a blend of virtual and in-person court attendance by our clients, as well as by staff. And we have a completely virtual pre-court attendance by court staff and by our treatment providers. We had to get creative with our sanctions. And so when work crew was back up and running, most of our sanctions were sent to work crew. And we find that that's a very positive sanction for clients. They're not sitting in jail. They're actually going out into the community. They're being productive and they're contributing back. Some clients would rather go to jail. We would rather they go out and be productive in the community. So that has been an option for us since May, and we have fully taken advantage of that. I refer you here to the numbers. I have kept these, if you want to scroll down, Jill, to 19 and 2000, please. Oh, can you hear me? Okay.
Is this what you're looking for?
Yeah, keep going. Okay, right there. So at the top of the screen, stop right there. You'll see 2019 pre-COVID and then 2020. And what I want to draw your attention to is the profound impact again on the numbers of clients that we are getting referred to drug court at this point in time. I can't address exactly the reasons for that other than for 2 months, we stopped taking in clients. April and May, we made the decision due to public safety that we were going to figure out what we were doing and how we were going to run drug court before we started to accept clients back into drug court. I am significantly concerned about the number of clients being referred. At this time last year, the prosecutor had screened 104 clients for drug court. To date, we're at 42 having been screened. At this time last year, 48 clients were approved by the prosecutor's office. Where we stand as today, only 13 people this year have been approved for drug court. Denials at this time last year were 54 clients. That's 52% of the referrals. Today we're at 28. Denials, that's 67%. Obviously that's a reflection on the folks that have been referred to the program, but I can't speak to why they've been denied. Last year at this time, we had 40 intakes into drug court. Today we stand at 10 for the entire year. So we have some concerns regarding that. Obviously COVID has been an impact on that, and then the impact to the court system and trials, et cetera. Moving on to housing. We are really quite fortunate with our housing. We work with about 5 different housing providers that provide housing in about 10 different locations, somewhere around 160 beds. We've been very, very fortunate in working with the health department and securing dedicated pool of funds for our clients. So we're able to get them into clean and sober housing and pay for at least 3 months of their clean sober housing, more if it's needed, but at about 3 months, we want them to start paying their own way. Some of the challenges with housing is there's a limited number of houses that will accept people in Suboxone. That is changing, but very, very slowly. There's also a limited number of female beds, which is compounded if that female is on Suboxone. There's no housing, clean and sober housing for families. So these are issues. But overall, we've been very fortunate with our housing. A very exciting development is we are working with our treatment partner, Lifeline Connections and the county in opening a recovery house, which is an actual level of care. So clients will get treatment, staff supervision, 24/7. This is a recovery house. It's due to open early next year. It will be paid for out of clients' medical coupon will be charged to pay for this housing. One of the issues with clean and sober houses is if a client relapses, they're out. We wanted to have a system, a housing in place where you don't get kicked out for relapsing. You actually get more services, which is really what's indicated. I am concerned that we may not be able to fill that 16-bed house because of the lack of referrals. And I'm very, very concerned that this be a successful program. There was a lot of effort put into bringing it about. There was many partners in the community that made this recovery house possible. And I want to be able to fully utilize that program. Gaps in systems, like I said before, there's some limitations with housing. As you're all well aware, there's very limited low-income safe housing in Bellingham. Our folks that end up in their own apartments or in apartment complexes where there's considerable drug activity. It's very, very challenging for them. So no clean and sober housing for families. It's always been a gap in service in attempting to engage folks that are approved for the program but are in the community. We do a fairly good job with them, but we could do better. It's much easier to get somebody that's in jail straight into the community and into housing. There's an indication that drug court is not serving and maybe rejecting individuals that have failed existing correctional programs. And drug courts were created to fill a gap in services for offenders with substance use disorder who do not respond to existing correctional programs such as probation, et cetera. That's the niche drug court is serving. That's a gap. If you do super great in probation and super great with the OC, that doesn't mean that you're necessarily qualified for drug court. We want people who don't do well in those programs because we provide a different service, we provide a different level of care. So that's a gap in the service, I believe. Folks aren't being approved for drug court who do not do well in those programs. Let's see, link of the program effect on participation. I think you have 52 weeks to complete drug court. If you're doing great and you're all plugged in and everything's going well and you're basically low risk, low need, you're done at 52 weeks. But the program is very flexible. If somebody needs additional care, if somebody is having a problem with relapse, they can stay in the program until they're finished. We like to have them done by 3 years at the very most. However, some people are struggling with getting their schooling in, remaining employed. Also, COVID has impacted these things, and remaining stable. So I don't see a concern with the length of time in the program. I think it works well because we can individualize it to what that individual needs so that they gain the skills and life experience they need to be productive members of society. So Shoshana, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would just add so I'm on the public defender assigned to drug court, and they're
Shoshana?
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So the issue with referrals has been substantially impacted by COVID in a couple of ways. One is that for quite a long time there were very few people who were held in jail unless they had, because of the state Supreme Court, they typically weren't being held in jail unless there was a clear community safety risk. And so typically a bulk of referrals to drug court come from people who are in jail, as far as, wanting to move forward and get into drug court as soon as possible. And so, but people who have serious community safety risks are typically not going to be approved for drug court by the prosecutor. So that was a definite impact on people who were wanting to apply to drug court. On top of that, then you had people who were out of custody because there were no jury trials going. There was no sort of timeline for having to make a decision for people. If people had the motivation, the internal motivation, I want to get into treatment and I want to get into drug court, then they could apply and be approved. And we did have we had 2 or 3 of those out of custody who did come in who have come in during the COVID admissions. But it's certainly not unusual for people who are out of custody to take longer to apply, and then if approved to take the step and come in, because without the external pressure of either a prosecutor saying, well, we've got a trial date coming up, you have to decide if you're going into drug court or not, that was gone because we weren't doing trials. And then also if they're not sitting in jail, and they obviously have a very strong motivation at that point to come in because it's getting out of jail and going to treatment. So those factors from COVID have substantially depressed the referrals. And then of the ones referred, there's been an increase in denials. I would echo the concerns that Chris raised about who we are not serving in drug court. I am concerned that there's sort of a fundamental disconnect between what the best practices of drug court say the target population of drug court is, as Chris said, people who typically have not done well with traditional criminal justice interventions, including supervision like probation or DOC supervision. And that's what best practices say are the people who should be served by drug court. And yet that is often a specific reason given for the prosecutor's office to deny someone to come into drug court, that they haven't done well on supervision in the past. So I think in some ways I perceive a disconnect between who I think I and the case management side, or Chris, sees as the people we should be serving are the people who need the program, as opposed to and who the resources of the program are best directed to, because other resources don't work for them, versus the prosecutor, I think, sometimes looking at it like, who do we think will be most successful in getting through and graduating? And so people who have done well when they've been in structured programs like DOC supervision or probation will be approved, they'll do well in the program, get out, but then once they're not under supervision, they're in the same boat that they were every other time that they weren't under supervision. Whereas people who haven't done well in supervision were not serving. So that's a major concern that I have, where I feel like we still don't have a meeting of the minds between the prosecuting attorney's office and the program as to serving that target population. And the one other concern I would raise is we have for some time been trying to reduce the use of jail as a sanction. That was even pre-COVID. That was a big change we made. There are some times when we do still need to issue a warrant or do a jail sanction. And I am still concerned about clients who are on an MAT program not getting their appropriate MAT when they're in the jail.
Ms. Vanya, did you want to chime in and add anything?
I think Shoshana really hit all the topics I would, but I'm certainly available if anyone has additional questions.
Okay, just trying to keep an eye on the time. We've got a lot to go through. This is really good information. I really appreciate the presentations from everyone here. I can't see all the panel. There we go. I can see it now. I can see some of the panelists. If you have a question, panelists, let's ask them now.
I have a question.
Okay, Mayor Fleetwood.
Shoshana, you mentioned sort of the conflict in how you look at this between the prosecutor and your office. Do you have any ideas for how you might reconcile that difference of opinion?
I don't, because I have repeatedly sent information from the National Drug Court Institute about the target population and specifically the need of serving people who have previously done poorly with supervision, and I haven't, it hasn't changed anything. So I don't know what more can be done other than the prosecutor being willing to look at that more closely. I feel like sort of at a loss. If there's more pressure to admit those people that's coming from other arenas, that would be helpful. But it hasn't, my efforts certainly have gone nowhere.
Ms. Mitchell.
So Shoshana, are you saying there's like a fundamental difference between how you see the clients that are eligible for drug court between the prosecutors and
Between who is eligible, but also who is, I mean, there's always going to be a difference between the public defender is always going to want more people in than the prosecutor. And then I understand they're serving, they have to be looking at the community safety needs. And we're always advocating for our clients to get in. So we're never going to have a complete meeting of the minds, but in some areas where the literature, the best practices of drug court say the target population should be high risk, high needs people. And one of the biggest chunks of that are people who have traditionally failed in other supervision. And yet that is a criteria that is often cited for denying someone from the program when it is actually something that should be a reason to admit someone to the program. That's where I see, and then sort of the disconnect of, we want to approve people who we think have the best chance at success, whereas the program is for people, like, you can't predict who's going to be successful in drug court at the beginning. If you can, I've put people in drug court for years, and I have my guesses, and you just never know. But I feel like there is the view I see from the prosecutor is we want to put people in who have the best chance of success at graduating, as opposed to the people who are in most need of the services, and who the particular resources of drug court are pay off the most, because they're for people where the other resources in the system have shown to be ineffective.
So Dan, I know you want to move on. I just wondered if we could give Eric a chance to respond, and maybe we need to allow this topic some time at another meeting later on.
I do want to give the prosecutor a chance to respond. I do have, and I will, one moment, Prosecutor Ritchie. I've got I just want to let folks know that Behavioral Health Co-Chair Mike Parker is on the call. He had a phone in because he has a bad internet connection. He does have a question. I want to honor that for him. He said, curious about the difference in outcomes for mental health court folks who are housed versus those that are unhoused. He's trying to get a sense of how critical that housing is for mental health court participants for this task force to know, so we can advocate for resources. So I just wanted to ask that question, and then I want to go over to Prosecutor Ritchie.
I think housing is a huge issue in terms of success. And certainly I think for us, we always end up getting people housed eventually. It's how early in the program do they qualify? Are we able to house them? Being able to house people immediately out of jail or SUD treatment has a different outcome than people who are down at the Mission, or, which is a great supportive place, but for someone struggling to be clean and sober and take their meds, it's a very difficult place to be and to be well. So certainly I think outcomes are better. I think too, with a specialty population who has special needs, it's much more difficult to house them. Drug court is able to use clean and sober houses. Very few mental health court participants would be accepted into a clean and sober house. The milieu or the residents at the clean and sober house have to interview and approve someone before they move in. And in general, most mental health court people present as being visibly a bit different. And often it's real common for clean and sober houses to say no to admission. So we have a different housing pool that we're able to look at, and different kinds of specialty needs for our folks.
Ms. Manu has her hand raised.
I want to just interject that I think it's very difficult for us to even get people in the door to mental health court unless they have some viable housing. So I think it's actually it's difficult to assess outcome when I think that they're not even getting in the door in the first place.
That's true on some occasions. We've had some people who have been homeless for 4 to 6 months. So what we have to look on the front end is how vulnerable is being homeless? How vulnerable does it make this person? Do they literally have the capacity to get to an appointment, to be found by a case manager, to take their meds? If they're a little more higher functioning, we've been more willing to work with them when they're homeless. If they literally can't literally take meds or get to appointments or be found because they disappear on the streets very quickly, then yeah, we don't want to set them up for failure. So folks where we don't think they literally have the capacity if they're homeless, we've been less likely to accept them to the program.
Go ahead, prosecutor.
First off, I wasn't really aware that we're going to be talking about drug court in this manner. I didn't understand that was going to need to come in and defend what we do in drug court. But I'll do my best to address some of the things that have been brought up. First of all, I want to point out that we have expanded the types of cases that can be admitted into drug court significantly over the last couple of years, and so we are handling more serious cases, and I think that we're doing that on a case-by-case basis to make sure that people are getting treatment, and which I believe is something that will protect the community. I want to talk a little bit about the numbers that you've seen, and the numbers are dwindling, and they're dwindling for referrals, not because we're not allowing people in from the prosecutor's office, but because people are not applying. People aren't applying, I think, as Shoshana pointed out very, very well. She succinctly said that we have COVID issues, and the COVID issues are, not providing trial dates, and they're not, which doesn't force a person to decide to end up to go to drug court. And we're also, they're not facing any sort of incarceration at this point. So, people aren't wanting to do drug court. So that's why our numbers are down. Now, as far as whether to admit people who are going to be successful or not, I'll tell you that we've made those types of decisions generally because we have a system where we do not require a person to plead guilty before getting into drug court. And most of the drug courts in the United States have a system where people plead guilty and then their cases will be dismissed if they are successful. And with our current system, we end up delaying our cases for good periods of time, and causing problems with the cases. And we're not willing to do that if we don't think a person's going to be successful. Now, if people would like to do it the other way, where someone would plead guilty first and dismiss the case later if they do well, then that might open some more doors. But I'll tell you that people have not wanted to do that. We've had a lot of discussions about that recently, about making changes, because we're willing to work with people and talk with people about it. But people haven't wanted to do that. What I'm referring to is generally the public defender hasn't supported that idea. But anyway, if anybody has any more questions or thoughts, I'm certainly here to answer.
Okay,
Dan,
I want to hold on. I want to contain this now. We've got a big agenda still, and I know that we could debate this all day. So can we please make our comments germane to this discussion? Let's wrap it up and move on. Chris Furman, please.
Sure. Just really briefly, the numbers that I quoted about the screening, approval, and denials from the prosecutor's office, that's the information I have. I don't necessarily see any of the referrals to drug court. What I see are the denials. And so I totally agree with the prosecutor that it's also a reflection of the number of referrals made to the drug court. But overall, concerned about the numbers going down.
Stephen Gockley has his hand raised.
Okay, go ahead, Stephen. And I want to make that the last question. We need to move on. Go ahead, Stephen.
I'll be brief. Eric, I find this really disappointing. I'm not concerned about the number of referrals. I'm concerned about the dramatic drop of approvals of referrals. And I'm also concerned about the inability at the prosecutor's end to deal with high risk, high needs people, which is the best practice. This area on the front end was the focus of some concern when we had the national evaluator come in and report on our drug court practices. You campaigned on increasing the use of drug court. So I think this is something that needs your attention, needs it pretty quickly. And I think it's something that I'd like to see this committee continue to work with the prosecutor's office and the drug court team as a whole to make some improvements on. I know there are some limitations, but I think we can do a whole lot better than what the data is showing us we're doing right now.
Okay. Prosecutor, if you want to respond to that, then we're moving on. Go ahead, sir.
So sure. First, I'd ask Mr. Gockley if he supports the idea of having people plead guilty prior to being admitted into drug court.
I'm not sure I know enough about that, Eric, to have an opinion. I'm not dissatisfied with the model we have. I think there are a lot of valid points to that.
Fair enough. Let's talk about this some more.
Okay, I think that I want to continue this discussion, but it's got to be in a different format. We've got a packed agenda. I do want to thank everyone for comments, and I know that there's debate around this, and I want to acknowledge that we can have a conversation about it without making it too extreme. Jill Nixon, can you go ahead and put the agenda back up on the screen? Okay, our third item today is updates on impacts and effects of recent policy changes. We've got a number of different items that Prosecutor Ritchie and Ms. Vanyo from Defender's Office can discuss. We talked about SOCs, DWLS third, violation of the VOXA violation going from felony to misdemeanor, and then crime and jail admission trends as they are germane to those particular items. Prosecutor Ritchie, do you want to go ahead and get us started?
Sure. So this is kind of a odd topic in some ways because I'm not exactly sure what to report on regarding DWLS third anyway. We simply have stopped filing DWLS third as standalone charges. When we decided to do that, we dismissed over 350 pending DWLS 3 charges. These were cases that were charged and pending resolution. In other words, they were heading for trial or to be plea bargained, and instead they were dismissed. We don't have any incredible stats to talk about because we are essentially charging 100% fewer standalone DWLS third charges compared to the same period last year. And I don't know the impacts on not filing DWLS 3 has had on other charges that have been, that may have been the result of searches after a DWLS 3 stop. And I don't know it. I'll tell you that I believe that law enforcement agencies are still pulling people over for DWLS 3, but it may be somewhat less than what was done in the recent past. I don't have any stats to really tell you about. SOCs. So SOC stands for Stipulated Order of Continuances, and we offered stipulated orders of continuances for many low-level cases, and that was done to just move cases during the pandemic. Basically what it is, it's an offer that was given to people to just be good for 12 months, and then their case would be dismissed. And if not, then they'd be essentially admitting that they were guilty of the charge. We had a number of people that took advantage of that offer early on, but that kind of died off quickly. And, that's probably due to not having trials again, because that's an important part. When people aren't facing any sort of consequences, and they're not willing to take any sort of offer. Now that trials are starting up again, I expect that we're going to see some more people taking advantage of this offer. Now, one reason to take advantage of the SOC now is because these offers are going to go away relatively soon. Come January 1, at that time, we expect a shift where we will be directly filing low-level cases, mostly simple drug possessions, straight into district court. And the plan is to have a plea in district court where probation can be offered, and probation would have services for a lot of people, and not for everyone, but for some, for a lot of people. And if a person doesn't want to accept that offer, then the case will be filed in Superior Court. So, one of the things that is kind of interesting is how these policies impact drug court, because they do. We were talking about drug court numbers, and maybe people were also taking advantage of SOCs. And then filing some of these low-level cases into district court is going to certainly impact drug court as well, because whenever we create an easier path for people, fewer folks are going to really want to go into drug court. And I also want to mention that LEAD has started. So we have our LEAD program, which is also providing services to people, and maybe taking some charges off the table as well. And drug court is, while it's great, it's hard. There are a lot of difficult things about drug court, and generally it means a lot of treatment and appearances, and not everybody can do that. So you know, while we've opened our door to more serious cases, numbers certainly have dwindled like we talked about. And I believe that's mainly due to the pandemic. You know, while we're talking about these things, I also want to mention marijuana vacates. This is something else that was important. I want to tell you that my office had set up a plan to vacate marijuana convictions from 1980 onward. And what we're talking about is just walking into district court with the support of the public defender and jointly asking the judges to vacate all of these old convictions, because, you know, the law has changed and we just want things to be fair and people not to be burdened by a prior conviction like that. We had plans to vacate hundreds of convictions, but at this point, our judges have not been supportive. They've denied our joint requests. We believe we found a lawful vehicle to get it done, but one judge has just refused, and the other one is, I believe, going to hear some more argument. But we're working on that. It's been real tough trying to get that process through. Anyway, I'm sure that Maya has some things to say, and I'm willing to answer any questions.
Okay, and Jill, next. Okay, thank you. Thanks for putting that back up there. And Ms. Vanya, I don't know your title. I want to refer to you by your title.
Sorry, I'm Chief Deputy at the Public Defender's Office.
Okay, Chief
And,
Deputy.
and anyone here is welcome to call me Maya at any time.
Okay.
The few remarks I have are just that we have not tracked the number of SOCs offered or accepted. I did ask my staff, but we don't have yet a case management system that would allow us to kind of track that kind of dispositional, what's happening that way. We are going to have a case management system that could give us those kinds of numbers, but we don't have them. So I can't really quantify the effectiveness of those offers or of that program. I think when we talk about low-level offenses going to district court, what would be felonies, rather than drug court, that's a fine way to handle it, and a good way to handle it, I think. But I think that also just opens up the opportunity for drug court and the resources that already exist there to be utilized for more high risk, high need types cases. And so I think that kind of is an opportunity. And I hope will be used and looked at, like maybe some of those cases that wouldn't have been considered before should be considered. And for now, LEAD is not taking cases off the table. I mean, I hope someday that the LEAD program has an impact on prosecution, but at this stage it doesn't. So I don't see that. But other than that, I didn't have any other remarks.
Okay, questions for either presenter. And I can't see half of you, so if you can, and we don't have a raise hand function, so if you have a question, go ahead and ask it. Okay, I'm seeing none. So I want to chime in. I just have a comment as a policymaker who doesn't work within the system other than the work that we do here. I see the items that were in that pick list as things that could potentially be really good for folks, especially asset limited, income constrained, and employed, which is 43% of our population, people in poverty, BIPOC, marginalized folks. I see what I see. I think those switches are good. I think that's helpful. But what I was concerned with and why I wanted to bring some of those pieces up, the discussion from behavioral health was Under Sheriff Chadwick, who I believe is on this call, had mentioned that he was still, the sheriff's office rather, was still seeing, they were seeing rearrests of folks that were on the SOCs. And that was a concern to me. And then DWL's third kind of came into play a little bit as well. But I just want to understand a little bit better that if we're doing what I think is a fair and just thing by offering people a chance, and if they're not succeeding at it, then we're not addressing the root causes of perhaps why they're not succeeding at it. And so that's the reason for bringing these pieces up. So go ahead, prosecutor.
Yeah, so I just want to say that I haven't seen many, if any, rearrests on SOCs. I don't recall hearing about any, but it could have happened. But we are seeing people that are reoffending because they've been released from jail, and that's a different topic, slightly different topic. And but anyway, SOCs are. I mean, I don't recall any happening like that. That's possible, okay. And if they do, then they're essentially going to be found guilty of the original charge. It's actually it's a nice break, giving a person an opportunity to do better, and and hopefully that they will.
Okay.
I guess I don't think there's a large number of folks who did SOCs, frankly. And I mean, yeah, so I don't think it's a huge, it would have any huge effect.
Okay, I might have got my wires crossed. That's totally likely. Again, I'm an outsider looking into the system, and maybe those folks that were released from jail are the folks that
I
understand.
think that's the population we're seeing recidivism because they're not incarcerated and they're not getting any services and they're not getting into drug court and they're not, getting into mental health court, and they're just out there.
Okay, and I see.
Just to clarify, I wasn't referring to the SOCs. Those are folks, obviously, because of COVID, we've been trying to keep the population low. So those are people that were maybe booked and released, and then we were seeing reoffense within a short time period.
Okay, thank you, Undersheriff, for clarifying. I appreciate that. It's important. Any other questions on this item here before we move on? Arlene
Yeah,
Feld.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Is there anyone who follows these individuals to keep them on track?
Which individuals?
The people who participate in these voluntary programs. Someone.
So for the SOCs, the stipulated orders on continuance, really they're just off on their own to not commit any new crime. That's really the only condition of the SOC. So it's not a programming based option. And again, I don't think it's really a highly utilized option either.
Okay, other questions?
I mean, I guess what I'm thinking is that the people who have the most difficulty functioning have the most difficulty following rules and keeping up with their responsibilities. And they very often benefit from some sort of navigation system where there's somebody checking, helping, supporting. And I just wanted to point out that, in my opinion, is one of the gaps in our systems, that we don't have people who we hire and pay to be supporters, navigators, mentors of people who are struggling to make it.
Good point. Any other questions, Mr. Gockley?
I'm hearing a lot of answers to some questions that we don't have the data for it. And so I don't have a way of assessing at what point we're gathering too much data, but or what's important and what's less important. But I just note that we're running into data issues again, and I see that data referrals to index is on the agenda. And so if any of these areas are areas where we want to be able to keep closer track, then obviously we're able to. We should make a note of that.
Duly noted. The perennial issue of this task force is always been data, lack of access to data, or it's complicated. So, okay. Any other questions? Okay, Sheriff Alfo.
I would just like to say the data is complicated, but it resides in just multiple locations and with multiple court systems. It's not consolidated, even though we have an index committee that's supposed to be working to solve that. I think it's going to remain that way for some time. And just to follow up on what Arlene had said, in our own medically assisted treatment program, which is designed to help heroin users in the jail that want in custody treatment, we modeled our program after one in Middlesex County, Massachusetts. And they actually have navigators there that go out post-release and follow the people, follow up in the community. They have, I guess, also they have a lot more resources and a lot more willingness to pay for those type of things than probably our taxpayers do at this time. And also just one other observation, aside from people that are in various diversion programs, law enforcement is relying more and more on citations or referring cases to Eric's office for the issuance of summonses. And we just took a look at through Dave Reynolds, the Superior Court clerk, and Bruce Van Glup from the district court, what the no-show rate is for people that receive these summonses or citations. it's about 80 to 85% are not showing up for court. And that was just reaffirmed at a budget meeting last week. So we've got lots of challenges ahead of us.
Thank you, Sheriff. Any other comments on this topic for the good of the order? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next item. I don't have the agenda up in front of me, but I think it's lead. There we go. Update on lead integration with Grace. And here to take us through are Vanessa Martin and Gail DeHogue. And go ahead. Gail, are you starting?
Well, yeah, Vanessa was going to start. I'm wondering if she's having some problems.
Okay.
So.
Hi, Gail.
Okay, there she is.
Vanessa,
Everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Well, thank you so much for allowing Gail and I to speak to the group about the LEAD and GRACE programs and how they're working together. Just to start us off, I just want to do a little reminder on, because LEAD was brought up a few times during some of these conversations. The LEAD program that we have here in Whatcom County is more, it's kind of being phased in. So right now we are receiving referrals from law enforcement and the community, and we are working with individuals before a crime is committed. So we're trying to be proactive and preventative right now. At some point, we will phase in the on-site arrest diversion part of the LEAD program, and we'll keep everyone updated on that. But right now we're doing what they call social contacts, but it's referrals from law enforcement and community. So I just wanted to touch base on that a little bit. But to get back to the agenda, we are, last I spoke about the LEAD program, we hadn't launched yet. So I'm really excited to announce that we officially launched the LEAD program on September 23rd. Which has been just exciting for everybody involved and I hope exciting for the community as well. And yesterday we officially onboarded, and when I say we, I mean Tommy. He's been doing great work and onboarded our 5th intensive case manager. So we now have our full LEAD team. So that consists of a LEAD supervisor, 5 intensive case managers, and then the program manager, which has oversight of the LEAD supervisor, and the program manager for LEAD is also the program manager for the GRACE program. So this has been working really well for us to ensure that the programs are running efficiently and that resources are being utilized efficiently as well. So many of you may know Melora Christensen. She is the LEAD program manager and also the GRACE program manager, has been doing excellent work. And right now we have approved 33 individuals into the program. That's different from working with these individuals. So they've been approved. We have 12 individuals that are currently right now enrolled in the program and are receiving wraparound services from the intensive case managers. And just quickly, I know we're short on time, but I just wanted to share some really great progress that is being made. And this is the Sheriff's Office referred an individual who is struggling with substance use disorder and experiencing homelessness. And one of our intensive case managers was working with this individual and was able to get them on the Housing Authority's housing pool, set this individual up with food benefits, and is providing continuous wraparound services. So that's, just some of the work that the intensive case managers are doing with the individuals enrolled. Another one quickly is from a parent, and this was a conversation between Chief Gum over at the Sheriff's Office. So this parent told Jason Gum, she said, "I'm thrilled to hear about the LEAD program. My son's life was heading down a path of self-destruction, and he's taking his family with him. It's refreshing to know that there's help out there, and they've exhausted all avenues themselves to help him. She said that to know that there are professionals who know more about the system than we do can guide him in the right direction. She says, thank you for taking him on. I feel like I can breathe again. So this program has launched not that long ago, and we're already making really great progress. So it's kudos to everyone involved in this. And so with the GRACE and LEAD programs, you know, again, they share a program manager. The LEAD grants provide funding for that position, a portion of it, and the GRACE pays for the other half of the position. That is the same for the admin assistant position that we're going to be filling very soon. So both programs are going to be providing funding for the positions that are being shared. So that also kind of ties the programs together, which is working really well. And they also share office space, so everyone is within the same, you know, under the same roof, which allows for a lot of collaboration and program efficiency, and just, you know, to be able to discuss clients, the members, the resources being used. So that again is working really well. And lastly, it's we're in the beginning stages of reviewing what the task force has already approved for the racial equity toolkit. And we're looking to also approve that for the LEAD program, and I believe the GRACE program as well. So it again, it's integrity for the programs, consistency within the programs. So everything seems to be just working really well. I'm very, very pleased. And I will turn it over to Gail to talk about some additional things about the programs.
So thank you, Vanessa. More on how LEAD and GRACE are integrated. The case management model used for LEAD is the same case management model used for GRACE. Both programs staff are referred to as intensive case managers. The referrals that are made to the programs are viewed through the lens of both programs so that we can ensure a good fit for potential members. There are similar outcomes for both GRACE and LEAD. Those outcomes that we share: reduced recidivism, improved quality of life for the member, and increased public safety. Both programs are using the same data system. We're using Gelada. LEAD is able to build on the relationships and partnerships established with GRACE. The LEAD program was able to step right in and have those partnerships in place already. The LEAD program is using the management team model that GRACE uses, with the crossover from the GRACE management team over to the LEAD management team. So there, as you can see, we have a lot of common elements in our programs, and we are very supportive of each other.
Excellent. Questions from the panelists on LEAD and GRACE integration? Okay. I just want to make a quick comment. I think this is a huge lift for our community in terms of helping people and adding capacity to a system that was good. Now it's getting to the great level, in my opinion. Think about community paramedicine, GRACE, now LEAD. We're helping what I refer to as patients or people in a way that we didn't before. And I just, Prosecutor Ritchie, I just want to tell you that I just really respect your leadership on bringing that forward. Ms. Martin and the whole team, the whole LEAD team that worked for a while on doing this. Thank you for your hard work. We're going to really be helping out more people. One question, can we just get a read here for the record on what's the capacity for folks in both LEAD and GRACE program together additive? What does that number look like? Do we know?
So, yeah, Gail, do you want to maybe talk about GRACE, and I'll just do LEAD really quick. So with the five intensive case managers for LEAD, they have the capacity to be actively working with 100 individuals total. They can be working with more than that if there's less activity or less services that are needed for individuals, but an active caseload will end up equaling about 100 individuals for the total of the 5 case managers.
And for Grace, the 4 intensive case managers can carry a total of 80. So active. And so I think the same notion goes for lead, that once in lead, always in lead. The same goes for Grace. We will do follow-up work. If someone needs some more help after they've graduated or exited our programs, they're still in our system and it's still on our radar. So that's 180 active.
Great news. Yeah, good work, everybody. And I just a clarifying question, is the idea around the lower caseloads for higher level of service provision, is that kind of the thinking?
That's essential.
Correct.
Excuse me for interrupting, but if you have a 20 caseload with heavy cases, that's really a lot.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. It's good. I want this on the public record so people can refer back to this. Okay, any other items for our lead and Grace presenters, panelists? Okay, go ahead, Stephen Gockley.
First of all, thanks to Eric and Vanessa and Gail. These are incredible additions to the community toolkit. My question is, if you're operating anywhere close to the capacities that you just described, do we bump up against capacity in the service provision end of things in the community? And if so, where does that happen? And are you thinking ahead to addressing that issue?
So for Grace, we have plenty more people we could serve. If that's the question you're asking, Stephen.
This is Ann. Gail, you want me to take that?
Sure.
I think, Stephen, the GRACE program in particular works to support the agencies working with these people. So our job is to fill in the gaps that a single agency can't provide for these complex individuals. There's some similar processes in place for LEAD. So to the extent that we can support the agencies in our community, we can increase the number of people we serve as we have more intensive case managers.
That's very helpful, Ann. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for our presenters here on this topic? Okay, seeing none, we're doing pretty good on time. We'll go back to the agenda. Item number 5, racial population of the jail. Here to take us through is Chief Jones.
Good afternoon. Yeah, it is afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I sent a late handout, so if you haven't had a chance to see it, it will be coming on your email because Jill showed me a lot of grace this morning and is also operating the how to make it show up on the screen. This is basically, we've been tracking breakdown by ethnicity on jail population. This one goes back to 1994 because that's when we started keeping the statistics on it. They're relatively stable. There are periods of time where they peak and where they go down. There are 2 things that need to be mentioned when you're looking at these numbers. The first and foremost has to, well, there's 3 because there's a change that's happened. But the first and foremost is regarding Native Americans and their percentage of the population. Because this county jail holds for both the Nooksack tribe and the Lummi Nation, that skews the number of offenders here who are in custody for state charges versus the tribal charges. I did a breakdown, actually, it was a request of one of the county council members, and we go on the assumption that anybody who is Native American, anybody who is here on a Lummi tribal charge or a Nooksack tribal charge is going to be Native American because that's what their jurisdiction encompasses. So what you find is that out of the entire population that self-identifies as Native American, about 44% of them are in custody because of the court systems with the Lummi tribe or the Lummi Nation and the Nooksack tribe. So that reduces the population of Native Americans who are in custody for non-tribal charges by about 50%. So it reduces it, it explains some of the higher numbers. So that's the first issue I want you to be aware of. The second is in 2019, the federal government changed their mind and decided that Hispanic would no longer be a title that we use to collect data for folks who are Latinx, some either Central American, South American, Mexican, and our RMS isn't set up to capture ethnicity. And that was actually a logical step on the part of the feds. It would have been very helpful if they had let us know ahead of time. So what you see is that we've got percentage of the population that is Hispanic up until 2019. There is going to be an upgrade to the RMS, and I have some hope that as part of that, we're going to be able to get this straightened out. We will not be able to go back and gather the historical data simply because it was never recorded at the time somebody came in. The last thing that can skew some of the percentages, strangely enough, has to do with drug court. And that is because I started grabbing some data a number of years ago about repeat customers to our facility. And we were seeing certain individuals that had been booked 8, 9, and 10 times in a calendar year. When we went back, or when I went back to double check on them, I found across the board, it was they were coming into custody due to drug court violations as a sanction. Now, some of that has changed, but I've only just earlier today got some of the more recent data. There was one particular incident, and this was from 2016, where it showed that we had an individual who had been booked 10 times who was African American, which skews the numbers as far as what percentage of our population is African American. And it turned out they were for 1 or 2 day drug court sanctions. So that comes into the mix too, and we haven't quite figured out how to parse that out and weight those numbers. So what you're seeing are basically raw counts converted to percentages, and folks will tell us what they consider themselves. We do not have a category for multiracial, simply again, because that's not been a data point that we're able to use because it's not included in the federal system. It's only been in the last year to 18 months that we've had a category to be able to track and categorize folks who are transgendered or non-binary, because the system was real clear you had to be one or the other. So there's some limitations to this, but it does give you a general idea of what the breakdown is in the jail. So all of that being said, are there any questions?
Jill, can you go ahead and take us back to the gallery view? I think I can see. Okay. Questions, panelists? Heather Flaherty.
Pardon me. Hi, Heather Flaherty, citizen representative. I'm wondering, thank you so much, Chief Jones, for the data. I think it's so important because it's such an important conversation in the community. And if we don't have the data, we apply national statistics where they might not always apply. I'm wondering if we have booking data available so that we can understand jurisdiction by jurisdiction, that second layer of who's arresting the different races. Just, I mean, even with the explanations, I still see disparities in the data. And so just getting to that second layer to try to help understand why those disparities exist.
That, I don't know. To tell you the truth, I'm not sure if I can get the system to bring forward that data. So that's the first question. I can look into it and in greater detail, but Sheriff Elfo, it looked like you.
Yeah, I was just going to add 2 caveats to what and try to respond a little bit to Heather's question and other possible anomaly that may be out there. If someone is arrested for a felony crime and they're booked into the jail or they're referred to the prosecutor and they go to court, and they send them down to self-book with a release, those show up as bookings from the sheriff's office. If someone's out in the community, they check in to serve their jail time. It doesn't go back to the original booking by the Bellingham Police. It'll show up as one of ours. So that's something else we would I need to separate. And the other fundamental thing I just want to make sure we don't lose sight of is this does not reflect all criminal justice involved people. Most misdemeanors, gross misdemeanors, and some felony cases are now either citations or they're referred by to the prosecutor's office. So these people may become involved in the criminal justice system, but just not be reflected on the jail records. So that's something we've talked about from the beginning, and it's a problem where the different systems don't work together at this point to give us a clear picture. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
One of the other things, Heather, is that it may very well be that there is somebody who is brought in by Bellingham police officer, but they're brought in on a Ferndale warrant. So although the officer is the arresting officer, the agency is actually not the one that's getting this person involved in the criminal justice system. It was a judge in Ferndale who issued a warrant because, as the sheriff mentioned earlier, high rates of failing to appear. I can certainly look to see if the ability is there to pull out booking data as you take into the consideration ethnicity or race. It also may be possible if this committee wanted to make that same kind of inquiry of the various law enforcement agencies, because as the sheriff's pointed out, actually probably more than once, we don't share databases, and about 70% of our offenders are actually brought into custody on multiple charges from multiple jurisdictions. So it's one of those, here's the number, and then here are the following 6 things that explain some of the nuances of it.
Okay, other questions? Moonwater, go ahead.
Just wanted to check my own understanding, and thank you so much for bringing this data forward. So just to distill what you were speaking to in terms of these being raw numbers, am I correct in understanding that the numbers represent duplicated counts of the same individual?
They may.
There isn't a way to tease out a singular count that doesn't duplicate the same human being at this point in time?
There may be by reverse engineering it, and I've started playing with that over the past probably week and a half because of how the system works. And I'm working with a very skilled and a very patient IT tech. So I may be able to refine that somewhat and get it back to you. We're looking at, when I looked at, say, the 2016 data, approximately 50% of people were arrested or booked twice or more. Now, part of that is also reflecting something that the sheriff touched on, is that they may have been arrested on a probable cause. So they got caught doing something brought to the attention of law enforcement. They come into jail and they get out, they work their way through the criminal justice system, and they're given 10 days in county jail. So they come back in on that same charge, usually over at the work center, and finish doing their time. So that's going to show as a duplicated booking, and that trying to parse out some of that stuff to look at. My sense is this committee really is looking at people who are getting arrested off the street and coming into custody, not turning themselves in or not being picked up maybe on a fugitive warrant at the border, and trying to parse that out. Nothing is impossible, but it's a little bit challenging. We're still trying to figure out how to tweak the system to get it to do that.
Okay, other questions for Chief Jones? Okay, I don't see any, but Chief, I want to just clarify as it relates to some of the tribal charges. Mike Parker, I think your baby's talking. Okay, thanks for muting. Okay, it's part of reality now. I want to understand, you said state charges versus tribal charges would account for about 50% of the population?
About 44%.
Oh, I'm sorry, correct, 44%. And then do you know if Lummi Nation still does swift and certain?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part of that.
Do you know if Lummi Nation still uses swift and certain as a policy for their tribal members?
I don't know, although I have a suspicion not as much. Part of that is simply because the numbers of Native Americans have been, as a percentage, has been dropping. And I know the Lummi Nation is very much focusing on recovery for their members who have substance abuse issues. They're running some of their own programs now, like electronic monitoring and that type of thing. So they're not coming into our system as frequently as they used to. If you look back at the numbers, you'll see that there were some that 20% of our population was Native American. As of the end of September of this year, it's dropped in half. So it's 10%. Part of that is also, however, because the jail is full, there's a requirement that although we'll take folks in and keep them for a few days, they need to relocate them to a step-down jail, which at this point is mainly Chehalis. So there's some, they may remain incarcerated, but just not here.
Okay. Okay, thanks for clarifying. That helps.
Sure.
Okay, other questions for Chief Jones? Okay.
Yeah, Dan, this is Mike, and my apologies about the background
No,
noise.
that's fine. Go ahead, Mike.
Claire is very passionate about criminal justice reform. So, Chief Jones, thank you so much for the information. And I thought I heard a little bit around, it was a question that came up for me when you mentioned that the feds eliminated Hispanic as a category. Did I hear you say correctly that we may have some room, we don't currently, but to customize the type of data that we capture so that an individual might possible in the future still be able to choose that if they so self-identify?
What the federal government did was move it from a racial category to an ethnic category, which actually makes a lot of sense because there's an overlap and the folks that make this decision clearly identified it. It's not solidly tied to race as the standard understanding of the term. The difficulty was our system used race as the identifier because since we started it in 2013, that's where the selection was. When the feds changed that, it moved them over to a different data point, which is ethnicity. And we have that there, but the report doesn't pull it out. And we still need to emphasize with our deputies that they need to fill out not only race, but also ethnicity in order to catch folks who identify as Latinx. And we're still in that transition. And even though we can start collecting it once we get all the deputies in the habit of doing that, we can't get it out of the system yet. So that's one of those things that we're working with IT about, excuse me.
Thanks for that clarification.
Sure.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, let's move on. Get the agenda back up. Re-entry with MCOs and data requests. So I don't have a presenter for either one of these. Was there a person that wanted to present on this? And we are running out of time.
We talked about it last time, Ann and I did, and I don't know if we need to say more, or did the Behavioral Health Committee get any information on this last time?
We have some data sheets that were a part of this meeting presentation, but beyond that, I think maybe that's an item that's going to have to go back to that committee.
Okay, whatever you'd like. I can either give a quick synopsis or not.
Hold on, let me check the time real quick. Anyone have a clock? 1:49. Let's, you know what, we have a few minutes. Go ahead, Ms. Mitchell, go ahead and take us through.
Okay, just that the health department had begun to negotiate with the MCOs, managed care organizations, health plans, to contract with them to provide half-time reentry staff in the jail on our jail behavioral health program, because we were looking at a reduction of staff due to losses of funding in our behavioral health sales tax related to the COVID pandemic. And the MCOs decided not to fund a part-time position, and instead they had hired their own staff. And those staff basically would come up once, maybe twice a month, and provide a very slim set of services to a very few people. And they would be asking our staff still to do a number of activities on their behalf. And we said, well, we would still need to be reimbursed because that's time is money and that's our people's time. and they still declined to provide any support. And I think that ties into the bigger picture of sort of their lack of ties to the community, and I think Anne can probably take it from here. Anne?
I think all I would say is that the managed care organizations really don't want to contract out services that they are obligated to provide. However, they have come to the realization that in order for them to get information from counties as to who is in the jail and if they are there and they're enrolled or covered lives, that they're going to have to reimburse county staff for some of the work to do that. But I think in referencing the earlier discussion about navigators that both the sheriff and Chief Jones talked about, I think for us as a community and certainly as part of the task force, maybe we want to be more clear in terms of what we believe successful and effective reentry services look like. And I think that's an excellent conversation to have with the MCOs going forward. Giving people a list of resources as they're released from the jail obviously isn't particularly helpful. And I think we really need to embark on a journey with the MCOs to have them understand what the work really looks like.
Okay, questions on this item? Okay, I don't see any questions. Okay, and then our last item is data requests for index committees. And again, I don't have a presenter. Did we have a person that wanted to speak to that issue? Other than we just need data.
Dan, this is Mike. One of the reasons why I think we had this on here was to have the combined task force members have an opportunity to put forth maybe questions that either were generated from this discussion or previous discussions, and then in a more kind of quasi-formal way, be able to transmit that to who I hope is still going to be leading our group. I think it was Caleb will be leading that index group. So that was just my recollection as to why it's on the agenda.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. And if folks don't have a question right now, but you have one later, please get that over to index so we can get those questions answered. And I think that was our last item aside from public comment. Jill Nixon, do we have anyone? Oh, Moonwater, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Can I just say just one thing that's standing out to me just in terms of the data presented by the jail is just honing in on the community interest to look at whether or not people of color are being disproportionately incarcerated. And so whatever we can do to hone in on that, I think that there's high community interest, and I certainly on this committee to understand that. So for the data piece. And then just real quick, before we jump into public comment, just to loop back to the drug court conversation, because that's been a conversation probably since day one when this task force was formed. So I appreciate that being a continuous thread and us being able to stay informed in the loop. And I think the question that came to mind for me is just, recognizing COVID, with the presence of COVID and how it's impacting so many different services. The question for me was more about what are the barriers to accessing the program at this point? And then what control do we have over those barriers? And so I think that just the little flag of concern that I have is not knowing what assumptions or misperceptions might be at play about the rationale for, or the reasons for decline in participation or referrals. So I'm just appreciating a commitment for the folks who are most intimately involved in that to really focus on what barriers appear there, and what control do we have to influence that? And just, if there's some role that our committee can offer to hold that conversation and bring folks back to have that as an agenda item, or if that's an offline conversation and keep us in the loop. I think my perception is that everyone on this call has been, and on this task force has been invested in that same shared vision of more diversion and incarceration reduction. So we could stay focused on what's happening that's new and different, and how can we help each other address those barriers, that would be great.
Anyone want to speak to that issue right now or want to let it percolate? Otherwise, fine. Okay, looks like we're percolating. Moonwater, thanks. You always do such a good job at distilling and kind of bringing things back, and I do appreciate you so much. Jill Nixon, let's go to public comments, see if there's anyone that wants to speak. It looked like there's a few council members and our council analysts on the call.
Yes, we have 4 attendees today. If any of you would like to speak, please virtually raise your hand at this time. No hands are raised.
Okay. Well, I wanted to thank everyone for taking the time out of your day today. I know you're all busy. I think it's important for these two groups to get together because there is such overlap in the work that we do. And so it's good to check in a couple times a year to get a sense of what's going on and what people are thinking. So just want to say thank you and look forward to, in 6 months, we're going to do this again. And thank you for your service on the task force. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.